Meanwhile, the president tonight and this shaky ceasefire with Iran now being tested. Only 3 known ships passing through the Strait of Hormuz today. Iran's demands tonight involving Israel now. Tonight, what a source is now telling ABC News what President Trump told Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Here's Ian Pannell from the region again tonight.
Tonight, nearly 48 hours after President Trump called for that ceasefire with Iran, the #1 condition to open the Strait of Hormuz immediately. Tonight, it'd appear just 3 cargo ships getting through that critical passageway today, where 20% of the world's oil remains at a standstill tonight, showing just how fragile this truce is. And the president late today saying, quote, Iran's doing a very poor job, dishonourable, some would say, of allowing oil to go through the Strait of Hormuz. The president adding, this is not the agreement we have. The regime saying it'll keep control of the vital waterway. But before the president started this war, there was unfettered access.
It's worth remembering it is an absolutely vital waterway to global oil and gas supplies, and it was supposed to have been fully reopened as part of this ceasefire, but only 7 ships passed through yesterday. President Trump accusing Iran of doing a very poor job, quotes, dishonourable, some would say, of allowing oil to go through that strait. The president also adding, this is not the agreement we had. There are also potentially deal-breaking differences between US and Iranian positions ahead of talks, not least over the issue of nuclear enrichment. Despite this huge pressure the agreement's under, President Trump expressing optimism, but without significant compromise, it's hard to see how a lasting deal can be struck.
This right here is the world's first ever 3D printed cruise missile, which is transforming warfare. This can be made 10x cheaper than what came out before and can be designed and made in weeks instead of years. It's being done at Divergent Technology in Southern California. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was so impressed by all of this that he came here himself to see it up close and personal.
What was his big takeaway from this?
His takeaway was we need more of it.
So real simply, what is a 3D printer?
So when you think 3D printing, think additive manufacturing. Instead of starting with a block of material and shaving it down to reach your final form, you are growing the part layer by layer, starting from nothing and constructing the final shape. You can go from a suspension part for auto to an airframe for a cruise missile to a part for a fighter jet, all using the same machine.
Now, for security purposes, we can't show you a missile being printed, but we can show you auto parts. So look right here. You see.
Of all the people on Trump's team, Donald Trump was the most hawkish when it came to Iran.
He decided to go to war on a gut feeling, period, full stop.
We did extensive interviews to find out how he made that decision.
On February 11th, Benjamin Netanyahu pitched the idea of joint Israel-U.S. strikes against Iran.
He lays out a very aggressive campaign to dismantle Iran's weapons systems, and then he also lays out some scenarios for regime change.
President Trump listened to this, and he said, sounds good to me.
But what happened next was actually, in some ways, more interesting.
Overnight, U.S. intelligence analysts very quickly went to work.
The head of the CIA uses one word to describe the assessment of Netanyahu's regime change scenarios: farcical.
Within the next few weeks, there were a number of discussions about what might come next. There was not consensus.
These 3 Trump advisors show just how varied the opinions were in the
I think that a lot of Americans are asking themselves this morning, what was all that about? What was that war for? You know, it cost more than $1 billion US a day in a country that sort of, needs money for, people are finding it hard to put food on the table. They lost 13 American soldiers. The regime is still in place in Tehran. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is still in control. 5 weeks ago, before the war, the Iranian regime did not control the Strait of Hormuz. There was a flow of hundreds of tankers, oil tankers and other things through that strait. The Iranians now have control over it. So I think a lot of Americans are thinking, what was that all for? And there's a growing debate here in America from both the left and the right, both sides of politics, asking the role that Israel played in this. Did Israel pressure or try to lobby the Americans to go into it? Important reporting this week in the New York Times about a
One of the most dangerous parts of this mission for the 4 astronauts aboard the Orion capsule will come at re-entry. Why is that? Because Orion is going to come in at 25,000 miles an hour. That means it will compress the atmosphere in front of it, which will heat up to about 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's half the temperature of the surface of the sun. Now, this shield down here is ablative, meaning it's supposed to erode away against that intense heat, but in an earlier test on Artemis 1, that erosion was somewhat uneven. So that raised safety concerns, and NASA engineers said, what if we bring it into the slightly different angle, a different approach? They believe that that will ease this and keep this problem from reoccurring. And then, with the proper amount of luck and planning, Artemis will safely slow down, pop its parachutes, and splash down in the ocean.
I am not Epstein's victim. Epstein did not introduce me to Donald Trump.
First Lady Melania Trump just completely undercut her husband and his top lieutenant's effort to turn the page from Jeffrey Epstein with this extraordinary public statement at the White House. She called for transparency and public hearings for survivors of his abuse and sought to distance herself from the convicted sex offender.
I call on Congress to provide the women who have been victimized by Epstein with a public hearing specifically centered around the survivors.
She also said she has never been friends with Epstein, but acknowledged they ran in similar social circles. And she sought to downplay a friendly email exchange with Ghislaine Maxwell that the First Lady had signed Love Melania, with Maxwell calling her Sweet Pea. Trump called it a casual correspondence. This remarkable statement reignites momentum and public conversation on Epstein, and it comes as the president and former Attorney General Pamela Bondi have actively sought to tamp down discussion on this issue.
The survivors
Turn now to the ISIS-inspired gunman who entered a class of ROTC cadets opening fire. Tonight, we now hear from the cadets who took him down during that attack and the instructor, an Army helicopter pilot, and his bravery before he lost his life. Here's Pierre Thomas.
Tonight, for the first time, we hear the riveting accounts of those ROTC cadets who stopped an ISIS sympathizer from slaughtering their class. It's just before 11 a.m., and Mohammed Jallo shows up at a classroom at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia.
He asked, is this the ROTC classroom?
I said, I was like, yeah, like we're ROTC.
Then all hell breaks loose.
He pulled out his gun. It was a Glock 44 .22 caliber.
And shouted, Allahu Akbar, and began shooting.
The ROTC instructor, Lieutenant Colonel Brandon Shaw, an Army helicopter pilot who served in Iraq and Afghanistan.
What led Trump, at 79 years old, to sit in there in that Situation Room when Bibi Netanyahu was seated as an equal?
Yeah.
Trump didn't even sit at the head of the table. Trump sat at the side of the table, and Bibi was across from him as an equal in the American Situation Room. What led him to sit there and buy what that guy was selling, hook, line, and sinker, when every other president was able to see through that liar? What was it? Because he was told the next day by our own top advisors, from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to the Secretary of State to the vice president, that these are lies and that these objectives are not going to be attainable. Don't believe him. We might be able to wipe out the Ayatollah, not regime change, Ayatollah. And we might be able to decimate some portion of their missiles and their military. Okay, that's true. But the goals as stated by Trump when we actually did pull the trigger were all over the board. And to this moment, he's pushing the